Arizona Territory, 1879. The sun was barely up over the Dragoon Mountains, and the girl with the wrong name had already been running for 2 days. Her dress was torn at the shoulder, her boots cracked, and the skin beneath them bloodied. But she did not stop. Not yet. Not while there was still breath in her lungs and a chance of getting far enough away that no one would ever call her Sarah Jane again. She hated that name. It had not been hers, not really. It was given to her at 10, the day the wagon train was attacked and the man with the gray beard and white-knuckled fists claimed her as his own. "You're Sarah Jane now," he had said. "You answer to me." He was dead now, along with everyone else in that godforsaken camp. She had not wept. She had run. The land was wild and wide, the sort of vast that made a person feel like they had fallen into the pages of a story someone else had written. But she was done being written over. She crested a ridge and nearly dropped where she stood. Below, a small ranch sat tucked between mesquite trees and sandstone boulders. There were horses in the corral, a low barn, and a single man leading a chestnut mare toward the trough. He looked up, spotted her. She stumbled back a step. He dropped the reins and ran. By the time he reached her, she had collapsed to her knees. The sun caught in her hair, tangled and dark with dust. Her hands were shaking. She tried to speak, but her throat was too dry. He crouched beside her, offering his canteen without a word. She drank, coughed, drank again. When she looked up, her eyes were glassy but clear. "You alone?" he asked, quiet. She nodded. "You hurt?" She shook her head. He studied her a long moment, then said, "I'm Nash Fielder. This here's my place. Come on, I'll get you inside." He did not hover. He helped her to her feet, careful not to touch her more than needed. He let her lean as much or as little as she wanted. And when she sat on the edge of his porch and stared at her dirt-crusted hands, he leaned on the rail beside her and asked, "What's your name?" She hesitated. Her lips parted, then closed again. He waited. Finally she said, "They called me Sarah Jane. You do not sound sure." "I am not." He studied her again, then asked, "What do you want to be called?" Her breath caught. No one had ever asked her that. Not once in all her 19 years. She looked at him, his sun-creased face, his steady blue eyes, and said, "Sela. I want to be Sela." He nodded like that was that. "Sela it is." She let herself breathe for the first time in days. Nash gave her space, but not distance. He showed her the wash basin, the small bedroom at the back of the house, the kitchen with its tin coffee pot and cast iron pans. He handed her a clean shirt and trousers that were far too big but warm and whole. When she came out, hair damp and skin scrubbed raw, he had already set a plate of beans and bread on the table. He slid it toward her, then sat across without asking questions. That night she slept under a roof for the first time in weeks. When she woke, it was to the smell of coffee and the sound of chickens scratching outside. Over the next days they found a rhythm. She helped with the chores, feeding the hens, mending tack, stacking kindling. She did not say much, and neither did he. But the quiet between them was not sharp. It was soft, like wool worn smooth with use. One afternoon, as they worked side by side fixing a broken fence post, she glanced at him and said, "You always live alone?" "My sister used to be here," he said. "She passed. Fever took her and her husband. I took in their boys for a time." She paused. "Where are they now?" "With a family near Tucson. Good folks. Better for them than this old place." Sela nodded. She did not press. That night, she stood outside the cabin under a sky so full of stars it hurt to look at. Nash came out a few minutes later, coat pulled over his shoulders. He stood beside her, arms folded. "You got people?" he asked. She shook her head. "I did. Once. Before the trail." He waited. "I was 8 when we left Missouri. My parents died before we reached New Mexico. The rest," she stopped. They gave me to a man who claimed he'd raise me. He didn't. Nash's jaw tightened. Did he hurt you? Sela looked straight ahead. Not anymore. He did not speak again, but he stayed beside her, and when her hands began to shake, he reached out and held one. Just held it. Nothing more. She did not pull away. The next morning, he found her in the barn, brushing down his mare with long, steady strokes. She likes you, he said. Sela glanced over. She is kind. Like you? She blinked, then looked down. I do not know how to be kind. Not yet. You do not have to know everything yet, he said. You just have to be here. She looked at him then. Really looked. Do you want me here? I do. Simple. Sure. Her heart beat too fast. And for the first time in her life, it was not from fear. That night, they ate supper at the small table by the window, and when Nash stood to gather the plates, she touched his hand. Thank you, she said. He met her eyes. For what? For letting me be someone else. He smiled, soft and real. You are not someone else. You are Sela. And for the first time since she could remember, she smiled back. The summer heat had begun to settle deeper into the earth, making the air thick by midday, heavy with the scent of creosote and horses. Sela stood at the edge of the vegetable bed behind the house, fingering the frayed hem of the trousers Nash had lent her. The beans were climbing strong now, and the squash vines had started to push their broad leaves across the dry soil. She was learning the feel of the land, how to read the clouds in the morning, how the ground spoke through the soles of her feet. Nash walked up from the south pasture, hat in hand, sweat darkening the collar of his shirt. He slowed when he reached her, leaned slightly to untwine a bit of curling vine from the fence, then looked over. You done much planting before? He asked, brushing dirt from his thumb. No, she said, eyes on the tender green shoots. But I like knowing something's growing where I put it. He nodded once. That's the best part of it. She reached down to guide a sprout toward the next rung of twine. Her hands were steadier now. You always planned to stay here, Nash? I did once, he said. Thought I'd make something lasting. Then things changed. Sela waited. I went north for a spell. Drove cattle up past Prescott. Thought maybe I'd keep going, see Oregon. But the land here. It didn't let go. She glanced at him. You left and still came back? I did. Why? He looked out across the flat stretch of sun-bleached grass. Because a place doesn't stop being yours just because it's broken. Sometimes it's more yours because of it. Sela knelt and pressed her fingers into the soil. Maybe that's true of people, too. He looked at her then, something unreadable passing behind his eyes. Maybe it is. That evening, wind stirred the air and brought the scent of distant rain. Sela sat on the porch rail, her legs tucked beneath her, watching the first flickers of lightning far off beyond the hills. Nash was inside, sanding the stock of a rifle that had belonged to his father. When he stepped out, she turned toward him. I'd like to learn to shoot, she said. His hands stilled. You sure? I am. He considered her a moment, then said, Tomorrow morning early. We'll go up near the ridge. She nodded. They rose with the first light. A gray hush still clung to the ground. Nash led her to a clearing beyond the last line of fence, where the mesquite gave way to open rock. He set a tin can on a flat boulder, handed her the rifle, and stepped back. It'll kick, he said. Brace your shoulder. Don't fight it, just lean into the weight. She held the stock as he showed her, fingers curled firm around the worn wood. The first shot rang out jagged and loud, echoing back off the stone. She missed. Again, he said. By the fourth shot, she hit the can dead center. Her breath caught in her chest. Nash smiled, slow and quiet. You got it. She lowered the rifle, the weight of it no longer foreign in her arms. I want to feel like I can keep myself if I need to. You can't, he said. You just did. They walked back without speaking. The silence between them had shifted, no longer cautious, but full in a different way. Later, as she hung a length of washed cloth on the line behind the house, she asked, "Did you love her?" Nash paused at the woodpile, arms full of split oak. "Who?" "The woman who gave you those boys to raise." He set the wood down and straightened. "She was my sister." Sela's cheeks flushed. "I'm sorry. I thought. No need to be. You're asking things that matter." She turned, clothespin still in her hand. "I don't always know what's all right to ask." "You're here," he said. "That makes it all right." That night, thunder rolled low across the mesa, and the rain came in slow and steady. Sela lay awake, listening to it on the roof. The sound reminded her of Missouri, of nights spent under canvas with the distant cry of wolves and her mother's humming voice. She had not thought of that in years. She rose and stepped out onto the porch, the hem of her shirt catching the damp. Nash was already there, sitting on the top step, elbows on his knees. "They always said storms were bad luck," she said softly. "Then we're both unlucky," he replied. "I've always liked the way rain sounds on wood." She sat beside him, the space between them comfortable now. The wind pulled gently at her hair. "Do you ever think about starting again?" she asked. He tilted his head, considering. "Not starting. But continuing, maybe. Picking up where things got left off." She looked down at her bare feet, rainwater darkening the boards. "If you had the chance to build something new, would you take it?" He turned toward her, his voice low. "If it was with someone who wanted to stay, I would." She met his gaze. "I want to stop running," she said. "I want to learn how to stay." He didn't reach for her, but his words settled into the space between them like a promise. Then stay. The days were longer now, the kind that made the shadows stretch thin and the air shimmer where it touched the edge of the hills. A month had passed since Sela first stepped onto Nash's land, though the memory of it still sat close behind her ribs. Each morning brought something new, a quiet task, a change in the wind, the subtle deepening of color in the mesquite leaves, and she took it all in like someone learning a language she'd always heard but never understood. Nash had begun letting her ride out beside him, not as company, but as help. She handled the gelding he lent her with a surety he hadn't expected, and when she asked questions about the land, how water shaped it, where the cattle liked to bed down, what to watch for if a storm came in from the east, he answered with the same quiet steadiness he gave everything else. They were headed back from the western boundary one late morning when she pulled her horse to a stop and looked down the slope, where a dry creek cut a pale channel through the brush. "There's something buried down there," she said, nudging her gelding forward. "Saw it catch light." Nash followed, reins loose in his hands. At the base of the slope, Sela dismounted and knelt near a fallen branch. Half covered in dust was a bit of metal, a rusted clasp, still attached to a cracked strip of leather. She brushed it clean, her fingers careful. "Looks like part of a saddlebag." Nash crouched beside her. "Could have belonged to a traveler. This was a wagon route once, years back." Sela turned the leather in her hand. "Do you think anyone came looking for what was lost?" "Maybe," Nash said. "Or maybe someone left it behind on purpose." She looked at him. "You ever leave something behind just to forget it was yours?" He didn't answer right away. "Once. But it didn't stay gone." She tucked the scrap into her coat pocket. "Then I'll keep it." Doesn't have to be useful to be worth holding. That evening, they sat on overturned crates behind the barn, watching the last light drift down over the hills. A small fire cracked between them, fed with mesquite branches that scented the smoke. Sela traced a line in the dirt with the toe of her boot. "I used to think silence meant something was wrong. That if no one was shouting, they were waiting to." Nash leaned back on his hands. "And now? Now I think maybe it can mean something else. Like peace. Or listening." He reached down and added another stick to the flames. "You do a lot of listening. I don't always know what to say." "You don't have to. Not with me." She looked up, the firelight catching in her eyes. Do you ever worry what folks would think? About me, I mean. There's no one around here whose opinion matters more than mine. And what's yours? Nash held her gaze. I think you're braver than most men I've known. I think you're learning to live on your own terms. And I think you're exactly who you say you are. Sela felt her throat tighten, but she didn't look away. That's the first time anyone said that like it was true. It is. The fire popped, sending a brief shower of sparks into the dark. She reached into her coat and pulled out the cracked leather piece, turning it in her fingers. Maybe I'll fix it, she said. Turn it into something new. Nash nodded. That'd suit you. The next morning, she stayed behind while he rode out to check the far fields. She boiled coffee, swept the step, then found a needle and strong cord and began to stitch the old leather into a belt pouch. Her movements were sure, quiet. She didn't hum, didn't fidget. Just worked. By the time Nash returned in the afternoon, the pouch was finished. She handed it to him without ceremony. For your nails and things, she said. Fits best on the left side. He turned it in his hand, then fastened it to his belt. You made this sturdy. Thought about what would last. Thank you. She looked up at him. I like making things that stay. That night, she sat beside him on the porch, her head resting just lightly against his shoulder. He didn't move, didn't speak. Just let her be there. The moon was rising, full and low, tinting the land with silver. After a while, she whispered, I don't want to leave. I don't want to be Sarah Jane again. You won't be, he said, steady as the hills. Not here. Not ever. She turned her face toward him. And if I stayed, what would I be? He looked at her, long and slow, like he was seeing something he hadn't known he needed. You'd be Sela, he said. And I'd be yours if you'd have me. She didn't cry. She didn't speak. She just reached for his hand, and when he laced his fingers through hers, everything inside her came quiet. She had been given a name that wasn't hers. But now, she had chosen one. And he had spoken it back to her like a vow. By late August, the ground had taken on the dull burn of summer's end, and the mornings came cooler, edged with the sharpness of coming change. The work shifted with the season, more hauling, more mending, less planting. Sela rose early each morning, her bare feet finding the worn grooves in the floorboards as if they'd always known them. She no longer asked which tasks to take on. She simply did them. Nash noticed. He didn't say much about it, but when he passed her a length of new rope to splice or handed her the ledger for the feed account, she felt the quiet trust behind the gesture. She hadn't known a man's approval could be so undemanding. One afternoon, she came back from the canyon's edge with a bundle of willow cuttings tucked under her arm. Nash looked up from oiling the hinges on the barn door. You fixing to build something? He asked, drying his hands on a rag. A cradle, she said, setting the bundle beside the porch. Not for a child. Just for hens. Figured they might lay better with something steadier than that old crate. He nodded. That's good thinking. Sela crouched and began sorting the branches by size. Back in Missouri, I used to watch the women weave traps from green wood. They'd never let me try. Said I was too small. You're not small now, Nash said, leaning the rag against the wall. No, she said. I'm not. She spent the next 2 days stripping bark and soaking the pieces in the trough. Nash didn't speak of it again, but each time he walked past her working, he slowed a little, like he didn't want to miss the shape it was taking. That evening, as they finished supper, he pushed his plate back and asked, What did you want before everything turned? Sela wiped her hands on her apron. I'm not sure I ever had the room to want anything. There's room now. She looked at the lamplight spilling across the table. There is. He waited. After a moment, she said, I used to watch the women at the trading post. The ones who knew how to keep books, how to barter without losing ground. I thought if I could learn that, then maybe I could make something that no one could take from me. You still could, he said. She met his eyes. I need someone to teach me. I know how to keep ledgers. Was part of the drive crew's job. I could show you. Sela smiled, not the kind that flickered and faded, but one that held. He stood and began clearing the dishes. We'll start tomorrow. The next morning, he brought out 2 chairs and the small tin box where he kept receipts and tallies. She sat beside him and listened as he explained the columns, the way to track interest on feed loans, how to record barter when no coin changed hands. By midday, she was copying the figures into a clean ledger with a dip pen. Her hand was steady. Nash watched her, then said, "You learn quick." "I've had to." That night, they walked down to the well together, lanterns swinging between them. The night air was still, the stars strung low and close. He drew water and handed her the dipper. She drank, then passed it back. He drank after her. She asked, "Did you ever come close to marrying?" "Once," he said. "When I was just turned 20. She wanted to live in town. I didn't. Do you regret it?" "No," he said. "She got what she wanted. I stayed where I belong." Sela looked up at the sky. "I never thought I'd belong anywhere." "You do now." He said it like fact, not kindness. She held his gaze. "And what would that mean if I stayed?" "It'd mean I'd wake up knowing you were near. It'd mean we'd work side by side, not just for now, but for good. And it'd mean, if you were willing, I'd ask to build a life with you. Not because I need someone to patch shirts or sweep floors. But because I want to know what you'll say when the first frost comes. Because I want to hear your voice when the days are long and hard. Because I want to grow old with someone who's known the cost of building something true." Her breath caught. "You'd want all that with me?" "I already do." She stepped closer, the lantern light flickering against her skin. "Then ask?" He reached for her hand. "Will you stay, Sela? Not just for the season. But for this life, on this land, with me?" She didn't pause. "I will." He wrapped his arms around her, and she let herself be held, not as someone rescued, but as someone chosen. The wind stirred the grass, and far off, a mule deer called into the dark. Sela didn't flinch. She had been given a name that wasn't hers. She had carried it through fire and silence, and into the arms of a man who'd asked her, gently and without condition, what she wanted to be called. Now, standing under the stars with his arms around her, and her name spoken like a promise, she knew she'd never wear another. The wedding was small by necessity. There was no preacher within 30 miles, and the closest church had long since crumbled under weather and wind. But there was a circuit rider who came through once every few months, and when he rode in on a clear September afternoon, Nash met him at the gate with a quiet nod and a handshake. They stood beneath the cottonwood near the western fence line. Nash wore a clean shirt that Sela had mended herself, the collar pressed flat, and the sleeves rolled neat to his forearms. She wore a blue skirt handed down by the woman from the post who sometimes traded salt for eggs, and a white blouse that had belonged to Nash's sister, let out at the seams to fit. Her hair was pinned up, not with any ribbon, just a carved bone comb that Nash had found tucked in the back of a drawer and given her without a word. The rider spoke soft, his voice worn smooth with dust and years of travel. He asked the questions, Nash answered first, steady and without pause. Sela's voice didn't waver either. When it was done, the rider offered a prayer, touched the brim of his hat, and rode off the way he came. They ate supper on the porch that night, knees brushed close under the table, the lantern throwing long shadows across the boards. Nash slid a small box across to her, carved from mesquite and sealed with beeswax. "I know it isn't gold," he said. "But it's yours." She opened it slowly. Inside lay a ring fashioned from twisted wire and a single dark stone, polished smooth. "I don't need gold," she said, slipping it on. "I need what lasts." That winter came in dry and hard, but they didn't feel it in the same way. Sela had taken to rising before first light, baking cornbread and boiling coffee while Nash fed the stock. They worked in tandem, not out of duty but habit grown from care. She kept the books now, marking down every trade, every expense. Nash let her make the calls on what to barter or hold back. When she spoke, it wasn't with uncertainty anymore. One morning in late December, she brought home a Navajo loom from the trading post. It was cracked at the base, the yarn left tangled, but she spent the next week oiling the wood, tightening the frame, and learning the knots from a dying woman who came through with her sons to trade hides. Sela listened more than she spoke, and when she wove, it was with the touch of someone who had learned how to make order from ruin. Nash built her a frame to hang the finished piece in the corner by the hearth. It had deep reds and ochres, a line of black running through the center like a river. "That's where I was," she said, touching the line. "And this," her finger traced the widening pattern beyond it, "is where I came through." He didn't ask what the river meant, or what waited on either side. He just stood with her, both of them quiet in the warm breath of firelight. The following spring, they added to the house. Nothing grand, just a second room with a window that faced the canyon, and a small porch off the back. Nash cut the boards himself, and Sela planed them smooth. She planted sagebrush and wild onion at the corners and set a line of stones along the path for good measure. One evening, after a day spent hauling rock from the ridge, she leaned against the new porch post, arms crossed, hair loose from the wind. Nash came up behind her and set his hand at the small of her back. "This place looks different now," he said. "So do we," she replied. He didn't speak for a while. When he did, his voice was low. "Sometimes I think about what would have happened if I hadn't looked up that morning. If you hadn't come over that rise." She reached over, threading her fingers through his. "I still would have found you." They stood there as the sun dipped behind the hills, casting long golden light across the dry grass. The cicadas were just beginning to hum, and the air held the promise of rain far off. That night, when they lay down in the room they'd built together, Sela turned toward him, her hand resting over his heart. "I never thought I'd feel safe," she said. "Not truly." "You are," he told her. "You're home." In the years that followed, the land remained as stubborn and beautiful as ever. There were lean months, dry spells, and one summer of locusts that stripped the beans clean overnight. But the hens kept laying, and the corn came up the following year stronger than before. Sela's weaving became known through the territory. Traders came from as far as Bisbee and Silver City to ask for her patterns, her colorwork. She never sold more than she wanted to. Never let the work pile higher than the joy. Nash taught a neighbor boy how to break horses without fear, how to read the wind before a storm. Sela watched him one afternoon, the way he crouched beside the boy, patient and steady, and thought, this is the kind of man boys should learn from. In time, they built a small room off the barn for travelers passing through. It had a cot, a tin basin, and a shelf with a Bible and a clay lamp. Sela insisted on it, said there should always be a place for someone with nowhere else to go. They never had children, not in the way folks expected. But they raised chickens, and a dog that never quite listened, and a garden that bloomed taller every spring. And when the neighbor boy's parents were lost to fever, they took him in without ceremony, just moved his things into the spare room and fed him biscuits the next morning without saying why. He grew tall and sure under their roof, and when he left at 18 to start his own ranch in the Verde Valley, he hugged them both without shame. Years passed like that. Simple. Full. When Nash's hair turned white at the temples, Sela's hands were already worn smooth with work and time. But her back stayed straight, and her voice never lost its strength. On the morning of their 20th spring together, Nash brought her a basin of water warmed with mint leaves. She'd been sick the day before, nothing serious, but enough to keep her inside. He set it on the table and kissed her brow. "You still look like the girl who came over that ridge," he said. She smiled, slow and sure. "And you still look like the man who gave me a name I could choose." They sat together by the window, the breeze lifting the curtain, the land stretching out before them the same, and yet not. They had not changed the world. But they had made a life inside it. And that was enough. Always had been. Always would be,